Do you sometimes feel like your knees are weak and with the slightest awkward movement you could injure your knees? Maybe you have had some knee injuries in the past and for some reason, even if it's been a few years, they're still lingering. Or maybe you're doing a certain sport like jitsu where knee injuries are actually, unfortunately, quite common. Now there are two parts to this video. Number one is why is it important to make your knees resilient? And part two, how do you make your knees strong and resilient? Let's dive first into part one. Why is it important to make your knees strong and resilient? We get injured because the load that's coming into our tissues surpasses the capacity to handle this load. That means that if you have to come into a rotation in the knee, this could be while you're just outside on a walk or a hike and you never train actual rotation in the knee, then this load, that input, is just too much for you to handle. The tissue is not trained to handle this kind of load, and then that can lead to injury. Especially when we do sports or train martial arts like jiu-jitsu, we come into all kinds of awkward positions where you are rotating and contortion and move and bend in all kinds of directions. These things happen all the time, and that's why it's important to, in addition to all the training you're doing, whatever it is, to do some specific strength training for the knees, so that you actually train the ability and the capacity to handle loads when you're asking of the knee for rotation or a lot of flexion in the knee. That just prepares you to be in all these awkward foot positionings, rolling over the feet, rotating in the knee, whatever may come when you go through life or your sport, and you make yourself, and especially the knee in this case and in this video, a bit more resilient. You specifically want to target and train in those positions and angles that you are not in very often, because that means that you're usually also not very strong in those angles and positions. So now how do you make the knees stronger? In short, two things. Move your knees over the toes and work on rotation in the knee joint. If you have been taught that you should not move your knees past your toes because otherwise it leads to injury, then it's really time to wake up from this incorrect and outdated information. It's because we don't move the knees over the toes, although it sounds very controversial, that we're getting injured. So you make your knees stronger by moving your knees more often forward over the toes. Personally, I take 1 day a week, that works very good for me right now, to focus and train knee resilience. And a lot of the things that I do in my personal routine, I'm sharing with you today in this video. In addition to working directly on the knee, you need to train also your ability to move well in your hips and also in your feet. The knee directly responds to the ability or the not existing ability to move well above in the hip and below in the feet. I have several videos on moving your hips well, moving your feet well, specifically hip mobility and ankle mobility and other things you can do for those areas and the whole body here on the channel. I put some more information below in the description, so I'm not blowing up this video and I want to stay focused on the knee specifically. I want to share with you 7 exercises today to strengthen your knees. Exercise 1 is walking. Walking is the most fundamental movement. It is highly important and helpful, beneficial for our overall health. You're literally born to walk. However, our lifestyle today is mostly sitting down at the desk, at the couch, in a car. We are very inactive for long periods of time and don't walk enough. So the first tip, always walk more. Now specifically for the knees, I recommend walking backwards. If you want to step it up to another level, you can walk backwards but uphill. That is a very nice way to naturally walk more, do something more for the knee specifically, while you're just outside on a nice walk, stroll, walking the dog, whatever you're doing, just turn around and walk backwards for a little bit. Now to increase the load even more with this backwards movement, you can also use in a gym a sled that you hook onto your body and then you're walking backwards. So essentially you're pulling weight that's in front of you while you're walking back. You just increase the resistance if you can handle it. However, for most people, just walking more and adding some walking backwards here and there will already be very helpful. Exercise number 2 is kneeling lean backs. You come down onto the knees, you untuck the toes so you are on the tops of the feet, so we can directly target the superficial front line. From there, you embrace and engage through the whole body, and then you start to lean back. You're using your strength nice and controlled good quality repetitions to come back up. Personally, I do 10 to 20 repetitions and then usually 1 or 2 sets of this exercise. Exercise number 3 is called teardrop squats. Basically, you're coming down into a squat and the heels lift up and you bend the knees, you come into knee flexion as much as possible, even moving the knees a bit more forward down towards the ground. So we just want to emphasize the full flexion of the knee and moving the knees forward over the toes. This exercise, together with the previous one, is a really nice one to tire out the legs a little bit already before you go into any kind of other workout, a leg workout, or continue with other knee strengthening exercises. Personally, for this one, the teardrop squat, I do 10 to 25 repetitions, usually just body weight, and then 1 to 2 sets. Exercise number 4 is split squats. I've covered this one already on the channel here a few times and integrated this one into a few of our yoga classes. So these are all really easy to integrate into a full body movement routine, into a yoga routine, into an animal flow. For split squats, you come into a crescent lunge position. You have to figure out the distance of your feet, but then once you're there, you move the knee of the front leg forward as you bend the front knee. You can lift the heel up of the front foot, but personally I work on keeping the heel on the ground. That way I can also get some nice input into the feet and into the ankles. I also have more strength and control if I have all 3 points of contact touching on the ground before I come up from that low knee over toe position. I highly recommend you start with just your body weight, but then later on, once you feel good with this movement, you can add dumbbells into your hand. You can also hug something like a weighted ball or so. You can also wear a weighted vest to just add a little bit of extra weight and more resistance. But with this, take your time. Move nice and slow, move your way up to this more level of proficiency and strength that probably at this point right now you don't have. Exercise number 5 is a chair pose where you move the knees forward over the toes and then you move the knees in. This is a position where a lot of people get injured because they all of a sudden do a movement where the knee goes inward and they are not used to this kind of load on the inside of the knee and then can injure themselves. So it's important to come into this position and actually build up some strength and building up some resilience so that when you come into it in daily life or in your sport or whatever else you're doing, you're just reducing the risk of injury. It's all about making the body stronger in all kinds of different weird, awkward positions and angles that you are usually not training in. So that actually is then what makes you stronger overall by focusing on those specific positions and angles. So the way I do this without any kind of weight, I come into a chair pose with the feet wider apart, as wide as the hips or a bit wider, and then I move the knees forward over the toes and then in together so that my knees are almost touching. However, this is just how I do it. Maybe you don't have the ability yet to bring the knees so far forward and so far in. So don't try to just copy what you see here in this video, but instead listen to your own body and move in a way that feels good for you. It will feel new and weird. Embrace the weird, but also be mindful, use common sense to not push yourself too much. I keep this one very simple, so I do 3 rounds. I come into it, hold the position for 1 minute, then I come out, take a break for 1 minute, and I repeat 2 more times. So I pretty much do 3 sets, 1 minute of a hold each with 1 minute break. If you feel good here, and I might do this myself, you can hold or add some weight to your body, maybe even use a weighted vest so that you don't have to hold anything in your hands. And the last exercise is piriformis push-ups. So this one is based on the 90-90 position where you bring one leg forward, one leg back while sitting on the ground. The legs are 90 degrees bent, so 90 degrees angle from the lower leg to the thigh of both legs. If you want to make it more accessible, then just bend your knees a bit more. From there, you're leaning forward and down with the fingertips down as the most accessible version, and you're folding forward and down over your front leg, targeting the chest towards the center of your shin of the leg that's in front. And then to come back up, you use slightly your fingers for support, but actually use most of the internal strength of your body, your hips and everything else that's going on to come back up. Then you come back down and slightly use the hands to come back up. You do several repetitions of that. Personally, I do 10 to 30 of those repetitions, but there are ways to increase the load. One of them is to, of course, take the hands away from the ground and just extend them out to the sides. I personally put the thumb in close the 4 fingers and just have the hands and the arms extended out to the side as I go forward and down and then back up. To increase it even more, you can bring your hands behind your head and then go up and down, or if you want even more, use some kind of weight behind your head or even reaching it up and over the head if you want to. In my personal practice, I start with the hardest version first and then I do what's called drop sets. So I start with a lot of load until I can't do any more, and then I reduce it from here to here, and then I do 5 to 10 more, and then I go down to the fingertips, do 5 to 10 more. That way you're pushing yourself quite hard, but in a very safe way. With the piriformis push-ups, I also target 2 to 3 sets. So 3 times with the leg forward and 3 times with the other leg forward. So 1 set is 1 leg forward, you do your repetitions, you switch to the other leg, do your repetitions, then you have 1 set done. So in this exercise, 1 set is right and left. And then you do the next set, and if you want, the next set. I find that I rather do less but more intense instead of doing a ton of sets. That doesn't mean that I'm going low with the reps. I rather target higher reps with really clean form instead of doing low reps and then making it really sloppy. After all, you need to think of blood flow into the tissue and repeated input into the tissue to make the knees stronger. So I'm more on the side of more reps, going really strong with higher reps, and then doing just 1 or 2 sets. And the last exercise I want to share is knee rotations with a resistance band. So I target internal and also external rotation with a resistance band. So just a simple rubber band, very essential tool for mobility training, for traveling, comes in really handy, really low price, and you can get a big variety of different kind of bands, how I have them hanging here on the side. So you just find a resistance that works for you, and then you sit down, and it's important to hook it onto something that is heavy enough or that's not moving at all. I usually put some weights on top of it or hook it onto some weights. You can also hook it to something that's just heavy enough so you're not putting that object towards you as you move, which might distract you from your training. Then you hook that band over your foot and you sit down. It's important to bend the knee, because when we bend the knee, then we have the ability to rotate a lot easier in the knee joint. If you would keep the leg straight, then there's not much of an ability to rotate in general, which is why we want to oftentimes target in jiu-jitsu to actually straighten the leg more or lock in the quad before we go for a heel hook. I recommend that you start with a light resistance and work your way up. Just be very smart about this. You probably have never trained your rotation in the knee. External or internal, doesn't matter, so start very lightly. If you have no rotation in your knee whatsoever, then I think it's great to start with knee cars, knee controlled articular rotations, which is a really nice way to get some rotation and some movement and some strength and resilience in your knee before you add any weight. Just be really smart about your training. If you don't have the ability to move somewhere in a certain position, into a certain depth, in a certain angle, with your body weight alone, then there's no point in adding weight on top. You just increase your risk of injury. So first, use knee cars maybe as a test to see if you have rotation in the knee. If you do and you feel good there, maybe consider adding the rubber band for extra resistance. If not, then just keep working on the knee cars and until you have the ability to rotate, and then you can add weight later on. Again, don't rush it, use common sense, listen to your body. For this one, I do only 1 set and I usually do 20 to 40 repetitions. So pretty high repetitions for a lot of blood flow. I usually just sit on one side first. I do the right leg, the right foot, which is internal or external, depends. And then I just stay seated and do the other side, which will then be the opposite of what I did on the first leg. Then I rotate and sit down on the other side and do the same thing. Right leg first and then left leg first. That is just how I do it, but you will find a way to figure it out for yourself. Now again, really important, experiment for yourself with just body weight before you add any extra weight or resistance. Once you have built up some strength, and that's really only up to you to decide, then you can add some extra load. With these exercises, it's not no pain, no gain or pushing yourself to the max. Yes, you're pushing yourself, but in a very smart way. Target, to generalize it, 10 to 30 repetitions. If in doubt, go on the higher side of repetitions and the lower end of load or weight that you're adding to it. Depending on the exercise, usually 1 or 2 clean sets of this particular exercise is enough and you get all the benefits from it. This is what works really well for me And I hope that there is something for you that you want to try out and that hopefully brings you also lots of benefits, strength and resilience. Modify and integrate those exercises so you can also live with more strength and more freedom in your body. That's it for today, friends. See you in the next one. Much love.